Josh and Me by Richard O'Brien, and the chapter is called The Great Pickled Payday. It was late summer and Josh and I were about 12 or 13 years old, and everyone in Jasperwich was getting ready for the big church bazaar and summerfest. Each year around this time the church members would start collecting donations and making things to sell so that they could raise funds for church repairs and mission projects and to help those who were less fortunate. Josh said that our group, which really consisted of just him, me, the Gunk Twitch and Smudge, should try to make something to contribute to the effort. He also said that if people liked it enough and if we made enough of it, we could even make a little money for ourselves. What the five of us could possibly make that anyone would be willing to pay for was beyond my imagination. But Josh said he'd come up with an idea. A couple of days later, around 2 o'clock in the morning, when I was sleeping over at his house, Josh sat up at the bed and yelled out, "I got it! Pickles!" "You want pickles at this time in the morning?" I asked. "No, dummy! That's what we can make and sell at the church bazaar. Everyone loves pickles! And they are really easy to make too. Have you ever made pickles?" "I haven't," he said. "But I have a really good cookbook, and besides, how hard can it be?" That's when I tried to kill him by beating him to death with one of my boots. But of course, there was no stopping him now. Josh couldn't sleep for the rest of the night because his mind was going at about 100 miles an hour making plans for his pickle project. By the next morning he had it all figured out. "All we have to do is to start collecting pickle jars, lids, cucumber, vinegar, spices," he said. "And then just have to find a place to make the pickles. Who in the right mind is going to allow us to use any part of their property for another one of your stupid ideas?" I said. "Maybe you don't know it, but we have quite a reputation around these parts." Josh wasn't worried. "I've already figured that out," he said. "We'll just ask Pastor Green if we can use the basement of the church. It has everything we need. And we'll be able to keep our project secret until the day of the church bazaar. We can make enough pickles to donate, and we can make some extra pickles to sell for ourselves too." "How many jars of pickles do you think we'll have to make a profit?" "Oh, about 800 jars, he said. "We'll donate 500 to the bazaar, and then we'll sell the other 300 all over town and keep the money for the five of us." The thing that frightened me the most about this plan was that it sounded like it might work. Right after breakfast, Josh went to see Pastor Green, and to my amazement, the good pastor agreed to let us use the church basement, as long as we promised not to use any explosives, that is. Josh told him that it wouldn't be a problem, because there was nothing that could explode in our project. Josh is really an idiot. I asked Josh, "How much is all this gonna cost us?" "Almost nothing," he said. "That's the beauty of my plan. We can get the Fetch farm to donate the cucumbers, and we can go all over town asking people to give us their old mason jars, and the only money we'll have to spend is for spices and the vinegar to make the pickles." So that afternoon the five of us started getting things together. Since the Gunk twins were related to the Fetches, Josh gave them the task of getting the cucumbers. That left Josh, Smudge and me to start collecting jars. What really amazed me was how willingly people were giving us pickle jars. In only 5 days we had collected 871 jars, and they even gave us lids too. So far so good. By some miracle, the Gunks managed to get 28 bushels of cucumber. Then when they went to the store to buy the spices and vinegar, Mr. Nutterbutter, the owner, asked us what they were for. When we told him it was a secret church project for the bazaar, he donated all the spices and vinegar. Everything was going better than planned. Josh had that stupid cookbook with him in the store, and he told us he would handle getting the dry spice. The rest of us would get the 35 gallons of vinegar, which was the whole stock that was in the store. But when Josh went back to the spice shelf to get the pickling spices, the packages were all mixed up, and without realizing it, along with pickle spices, he grabbed every package of cheese as well. The Monday morning before the bazaar, we gathered all of our ingredients and supplies and met down in the church basement to begin making pickles. First, we set all the jars up on a great big table. Then we got all the giant pots that the ladies used to make the cover dish dinners. We filled them with vinegar and evenly divided every package of the pickled spices, including the yeast, among the pot. Next, according to Josh Dumbo, we had to cook the whole mixture and put all of the cucumber and liquid evenly in the jars. Finally, after screwing on the lids, we had to turn the jars upside down so they would seal correctly. According to the cookbook, we would know when this happened by a slight popping sound, as a vacuum was created in the jars. We started cooking at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and finishing filling the jars and turning them over about 7 o'clock at night. The 5 of us stood there listening for the slightest popping sound, but it never happened. The only thing we could hear coming from the upside down jars was a slight tingling sound. That we didn't understand was that sound was being made by the pressure of the gas created by the cheese in the hot vinegar that was trying to expand. Maybe if we had paid closer attention to biology class about the lesson on yeast and fermentation, we might have figured out what was going to happen next. But as they say, ignorance is a bliss. You know how when something important in history happened, people say they can remember exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news. Well, it was exactly 7:36 p.m. when we made history. That was the exact moment in time when the first jar in the center of the table launched like a rocket straight up in the air and struck the basement ceiling. It hit with such a force right under the pipe organ that the vibration turned the automatic play switch on, and suddenly the organ began playing "Nearer My God to Thee" at a full volume. As it turned out, Pastor Green was beginning a deacons meeting in the church, and at the exact same time as well. Their backs were turned to the organ when it started playing all by itself. Startled, many of them thought they were having a religious experience. But instead of falling on their knees, they fell out of their chairs from shock. "It has to be those boys again," said Pastor Green. After the first jar struck the ceiling, all 5 of us became mesmerized, and we couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. Then the second jar launched from the table and knocked all the other jars over. Suddenly, with pickle jars all shook up, the scene became pure chaos. Now, instead of going off one at a time, they started going off in groups. The next jar struck the electric box that turned the automatic bell ringer. But the bells didn't ring slowly and play a hum as they normally do. Instead, all the bells in the tower began to ring louder and faster than we ever heard them ring before. All over town, people thought there was some sort of emergency at the church and came running, all carrying the first tool or weapon they could get their hands on, and at the same time, every light all over the church began to blink on and off very fast. Then 3 of the jars flew right into the furnace, and a thick black cloud of dust and soot began to pillow from the chimney and settle all around the church. This, of course, made the people call the fire department. Soon it became unsafe to be anywhere in the basement, so all 5 of us tried to get out of the door and up the steps at the same time. The only problem was that Josh had locked the basement door in order to help keep our project secret. He had put the key on the table with the jars of pickles, which meant that it could be almost anywhere at that point. We were trapped, and it was every man for himself. We all took off in different directions, looking for cover. Jars was pushing by my head at the speed of sound and smashing against things, sending pickles into the air as they exploded. I didn't make it 3 steps before I was struck in the butt with 2 jars of pickles, which knocked me flat on my face. One of the jars struck Smudge directly in his left eye, and he immediately started to scream that he was blind. This must have inspired courage in the twins, because they left the shelter of their spot behind the hot water heater and threw Smudge on the floor and immediately began to administrate CPR. Through Smudge's screams and gasps for breath, I heard one of the twins tell him not to worry, because he had heard that girls like guys with an eye patch. The only thing that saved Smudge from unconsciousness was the fact that 4 of the jars hit the twins at the same time, knocking them over and enabling Smudge to crawl away. The gunks tried to grab Smudge's feet, but only managed to pull off his boots. The jars were flying around the basement, and when they hit the hot water heater, the pipes broke and water began to shoot everywhere. By this time, Pastor Green and the deacons had run out of the church and down the basement step, but the door was still locked. They were all pressed against the door, trying to get it open. They wanted to get in as badly as we wanted to get out. At that moment, one of the pickle jars hit the top panel of the door, knocking it out and striking Pastor Green dead center in the chest. He toppled back, knocking down the deacons as he fell. Just when 3 more jars blasted through the door, and now as hard as Pastor Green and the deacons had been trying to get to the basement, they were now fighting to get up the steps and away from the door. They couldn't make any progress though, because there wasn't enough room for them to get up the step as one group. Panicked, they began to wrestle each other down the steps as they scrambled to get away from the deadly pickled projectiles. Soon the jars had broken every window in the basement, and they began to fly out on the street, the parking lot, into the lawn, and even the yard of the houses close by. The people from town now came running to save the church, were now running to save themselves from flying cucumbers. Just as the last of pickle jars exploded and it was safe to come out of hiding, the fire department arrived. Seeing the smoke and all the chaos, they thought that the church basement was on fire. So the firemen immediately stuck their hoses in the basement windows and turned them on. I never knew how powerful water from a fire hose was until the first stream hit me directly in the chest and pinned me against the cellar wall. Josh got hit in the face and it knocked him back. He rolled over 3 times before it pinned him against the furnace. The force of the water was so strong he couldn't even blink or take a breath of air. Smudge panicked and started screaming for help because he couldn't swim, and the Gunk twins waded through the shower of water and tried to save him and administrate CPR. Just when the firemen broke down the door and came rushing into the basement, they couldn't believe what they saw. There was no fire, of course, but the basement was completely destroyed and filled with about 2 feet of water. Everywhere you looked there were lids and cucumbers and broken jars, not to mention 5 very wet and bruised boys. Eventually, the firemen managed to get us out of the basement, turn off the water, stop the bells from ringing, stop lights from blinking, and turn off the stupid organ. The people kept asking if we were okay, but it really didn't seem like they were all that sincere. As soon as they found out we weren't seriously hurt, their whole attitude toward us changed. In my opinion, it wasn't really Christian of them. Even though they were relieved that the church was not destroyed by fire, they couldn't believe that the basement had been demolished by 5 boys making pickles. Josh and my reputation as the village idiot was at that moment completely and forever secure. the entire town pitched in to repair all the damage, whether they belonged to our church or not, and the merchants donated all the materials. Thankfully, the insurance company covered most of the other costs because they said a church basement destroyed by pickles could only be an act of God. We had to postpone the bazaar for 2 weeks, and all the money raised went to the repairs of the church. The pickle smell remained in that end of town for the next 6 weeks. Eventually, all was forgiven because Pastor Green understood that we had just been trying to do something good. He told us that he prayed that one day our brains might be as big as our hearts. He also suggested for the next year's bazaar that we might just wanna draw something nice, say pictures of angels and Bible scenes to sell. All of the nearby towns carried the story of the Jasper Witch's great pickle destruction in their local newspapers. Of course, this pleased Josh to no end. "We're becoming famous all over Virginia," he proclaimed. Once again, one of Josh's plans had caused a total disaster, and not to mention my near death again. Still, this couldn't get me mad at my brother and best friend. Besides, like the people in Jasper Witch said, it would be a great story to tell our grandchildren someday. And you wanna know something funny? I have the feeling that deep down, the people of Jasper Witch were actually proud of Josh and me and our crazy misadventures. Well, that's it, until the next one. And that's the gospel truth of the Great Pickled Payday.